April 10th, 2021. A cool spring afternoon in the Delano neighborhood next to downtown Wichita. There is an excitement in the air.
Let's go!
It's a day long overdue along Wichita's riverfront.
This is good to get in here finally.
Opening day for Wichita's new minor league ballpark has finally arrived.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a good one. Y'all enjoy.
The $75 million Riverfront Stadium was built to host Wichita's new minor league team, the Wind Surge. But the Wichita State Shockers are getting the honors of hosting the first game here against the Houston Cougars.
How do I get tickets? Got to scan that?
A new stadium opening is special and rare. After all, it's been 87 years since the opening of the former Lawrence Dumont Stadium. Fans wait in long lines to get a chance to see the results of the lengthy construction process.
Well, I don't know what to expect. That's part of the reason we're here, is to see exactly what's different.
This opening is special because even though Riverfront Stadium was ready for baseball and fans a year ago, the COVID-19 pandemic brought baseball here to a halt. The history of Kansas baseball could fill volumes.
Everybody in baseball, like I said, told me, you don't have a snowball's chance in hell of ever making that work in Wichita.
From it throws, striking out! The Shockers are national champions! An unbelievable story!
It was always us against the world, basically.
So there were definitely some naysayers, just, been here, done this, teams have come and gone, we don't need a new stadium, all of that, the stuff you would hear in most markets, that have had teams and left.
Why, even the smallest Kansas communities had their town teams, and competition was fierce.
But it was, we need the best players because we've got to beat that other town over there.
And the best players? Well, they weren't always in the major leagues. Sometimes they played for local companies.
So it had started way back with railroad teams.
And the best of those teams started coming to Wichita to compete in first a statewide, then a nationwide tournament.
The NBC tradition is strong, 86 years straight now.
But the main attraction was Fireball.
Sadly, in the nation and in Kansas, some weren't allowed to play with others.
Baseball has always had a certain element of segregation.
Well, yes, Kansas does have a great baseball history, and it has a very diverse baseball history.
I think Kansas is a superb baseball state.
I think baseball has always been a strong sport in Kansas.
And the strongest and most skilled of players, when they got the chance, would swing for the fences.
Swinging for the fences now is what they do.
This program is brought to you by the following. The Greater Wichita Area Sports Commission. The commission serves as the administrator of the NBC World Series. We are excited to be a sponsor of this PBS Kansas documentary and are extremely proud of the impact that the NBC World Series has had upon the history of Kansas baseball. Also brought to you by locally owned Meineke of Wichita, Hutchinson, and Derby.
Whole arm's busted. Only option is to replace it.
Just scratch. Unnecessary repairs don't fly outside a repair shop. They shouldn't fly inside one. Meineke, doing car care right.
Also brought to you by Fidelity Bank.
Our next move will shape the future of Wichita. Let's lean into the challenges and believe in the promise that progress holds.
And by Humanities Kansas. We believe that stories carry our culture and ideas change the world.
Wichita spent $75 million to replace the Depression-era constructed Lawrence Dumont Stadium with the modern Riverfront Stadium. Riverfront was all ready for ball in 2020, but with everything in place for players and fans, the gates remain locked. It was like being dressed up and no place to go because of the pandemic.
2020 happened is what we say, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, it was just different, and I think like so many businesses and industries, we had to adapt the best we can.
Jared Forma was the general manager for Wichita's new minor league team, the Wind Surge, at the start of its first season. His staff worked to be ready for the expected 2020 opening. And then the virus hit like a wicked knockdown pitch.
Obviously, it threw a curveball at us that nobody could have foreseen, and you just adapt the best you can.
That adapting meant laying off or furloughing much of the staff. And as if that wasn't enough of a blow, out of left field, something much worse struck the team. Team owner Lou Schweckheimer died after a battle with the COVID-19 virus. He was only 62. But Lou's vision and dream to reestablish a successful minor league team in Wichita lives on through the Wind Surge staff he organized.
He's here every day with us. Our whole mission is to fulfill Lou's dreams and visions.
If you look closely behind home plate, you can see Lou's name in the turf. Opening a new stadium in Wichita is such a special event, the new Riverfront Stadium gets 2 openings. The Wichita State Shockers versus Houston Cougars game gets the honor of hosting the first game here. The Wind Surge calls that the soft opening.
Obviously, when you do a soft opening with 7,500 people, it's not so soft. But overall, it's just a tremendous, tremendous day.
Then a month later, the evening of May 11th, 2021, what the team calls the hard opening of Riverfront takes place. Thousands more turn out to see Wichita's new AA minor league team and to take in the new ballpark with its modern amenities.
I think honestly it's something that Wichita really needed. The stadium's absolutely gorgeous. The way that it was built is completely amazing.
The newness of Riverfront Stadium with all the improvements in the fan experience catches fans' attention.
It's a game changer. The ballpark is the star of this show, and I think will be for years to come.
Now these conveniences are an expectation now, but they are a far cry from what our ancestors had while playing and watching early day baseball in Kansas. So keep watching for more on the historic Riverfront opening coming up. But before we dive too deeply into the new team and new park, we look back at baseball's beginnings in Kansas to appreciate its history and how far the game has come. It was Christmas Day in Emporia, the year 1858. Presents had been exchanged and dinner eaten. And though there was a chill in the winter air, a game of baseball was played in the town's public square. This according to an Emporia newspaper account published New Year's Day, 1859. There may have been and likely were earlier games in the state which didn't happen to get noticed and written about.
It evolved from kids' games over centuries.
Baseball historian and author Mark Eberly wrote the book Kansas Baseball 1858 to 1941. He was on the faculty at Fort Hays State University. He's written extensively about Kansas baseball history.
The game we play now was referred to as the New York game. And there were somewhat similar games that were played in Massachusetts and in Pennsylvania.
I grew up playing neighborhood sandlot baseball. Why, I still have the same glove that I got for my 8th birthday, and it's still ready for play. But I couldn't imagine as a youth just how old the game of baseball was. Baseball was played since the 1840s in several northeastern states. As pioneer settlers migrated to the plains of Kansas, they brought the new sport with them, at least by the late 1850s. That was before Kansas became a state January 29, 1861. Then there was a baseball surge in the Sunflower State after the Civil War ended in 1865.
And the soldiers who had played in the Northeast principally sort of became missionaries, and they spread the game throughout really the rest of the country. The war, more than anything else, was responsible for baseball going throughout all of the area of the United States.
Bob Reeves follows Kansas baseball closely. He authored the book, Baseball in Wichita.
And then when the war was over, they took it back home with them. And so I think the spread of it really owes a lot to the Civil War.
Dreifert says baseball spread quickly among the soldiers because the game could be played almost anywhere there was a field or open lot.
You could play with any number of players. Town ball, you could play with 5 or you could play with 55, depending on how you want to draw up the rules. And they made the rules up as they went along. But the game is still the same. Now throw the ball, catch the ball, hit the ball.
The first formally organized, incorporated ball team in Kansas was the Leavenworth Frontier Baseball Club. Records indicate the Leavenworth Frontier Club paid dues to the National Association of Baseball Players in December of 1865. Vintage baseball clubs, like the two you see behind me playing a game here at the Old Cowtown Museum in Wichita, are trying to keep the memory alive of the way the game was played in the mid-1860s and 1870s.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cowtown, where this afternoon you will witness a match between your hand-picked hometown club representing Wichita, the Wichita Bulldozers, and the Wichita Red Stockings, and our esteemed guests from Topeka, the Westerns.
This particular game is a reenactment of a game played in 1879 Wichita. Vintage ball games allow spectators to see the differences in the game of that era and compare those to today's game.
Enough is the same that everyone recognizes what we're doing, but there are enough interesting differences that people go, wow, that's kind of neat. And you can even see where some of the rules of today evolved based on the way we'll play in the 1860s rules.
Now imagine, if you will, Wichita in the summer of 1879, 9 years after the city was incorporated. These Topeka and Wichita teams played each other. The Topeka Westerns were considered the powerhouse team of that era in Kansas. So, Wichita formed a club called the Bulldozers to try to beat Topeka. The game was played at what was then the Wichita Fairgrounds. The fairgrounds were located in the 300 and 400 blocks of North Main, blocks where the Epic Center and Wichita City Hall are now located. Back then, the rules called for the pitcher to throw the ball underhanded, and the batter, called a striker then, requested a pitch location.
What would you like, sir? What's your pitch?
Fair pitch.
Fair pitch? High or low?
Well, with rules like that, it's no wonder the scores were high. This was before baseball mitts came about also, so players caught barehanded. If a ball was caught on the first bounce, the batter was out. The baseballs were also different then, and softer than modern baseballs.
It's a one-piece design, unlike today where they sew the two pieces together. So you can see on the bottom, that's where it starts, and all 4 sections come to a top.
These were town teams of that period. Now we'll talk more about town teams coming up, and you'll see more of this vintage game.
The very first ball clubs were more of a gentleman's social club, and they were people that ran stores.
They were those who had control of their work and could break away for a game and leave others to run the offices and shops they left behind. As early Kansas communities were settled, many of the towns organized baseball clubs for local entertainment and exercise. Wichita had some baseball firsts to its credit, soon after the Early Day Cowtown incorporated in 1870.
They have some of the first. I mean, it was a cowtown. It was almost like anything goes. Baseball team, fine. Black people want to play baseball, fine. Women want to play baseball, fine. And so, I mean, it just kind of was, everybody was into everything at that time. And so they ended up with some of the first back then.
And like Eberly says, Wichita's openness included women's baseball. His research finds that the first independent women's baseball club in Kansas and neighboring states was actually organized in Wichita in 1873, 3 years after the city incorporated. Eberly says those early teams preceded the first barnstorming women's teams. Now, often, women's teams were associated with the baggy pants the women wore called bloomers. Because of that, the women's teams and their players were often called bloomers. This photo shows the Boston Bloomer girls visiting Pratt, Kansas, August 6, 1912. The Industrial Revolution was underway in that era. More people were leaving the farm and moving to towns and cities, finding indoor jobs there.
And so there was this big move that we need to get out and we need to get some exercise, like we did back when everybody was working on the farm.
So many turned to playing baseball to fill their exercise needs. That helped to further popularize the game in Kansas.
I think the thing that's always benefited Kansas is the large number of town teams, semi-pro teams, amateur teams, and just the fan base in a lot of small towns around Kansas. What else is there to do? You know, you go watch baseball.
Town teams brought on increased competition. Kansas towns were driven to find the best 9 ball players to compete against other communities. Now here's a photo of the Leote 9 players from 1896. The examples of the Kansas town teams goes on and on. Our photos come from individual collections and city and county historical museums. This photo shows a ball game in the town of Summerfield, which is on the Kansas-Nebraska border in Marshall County. The writing on the photo indicates the game here was between the towns of Blue Rapids and Frankfort, both also in Marshall County. The attendance indicated as 2,000, which was about 4 times the population of Summerfield then. These photos indicate how important town ball and industrial team ball was back then. There was heated competition.
We need the best players because we've got to beat that other town over there.
It was a time of town boosterism. The small community of Truesdale even called their team the Truesdale Boosters. That Edwards County community is no longer incorporated, but more than a century ago was populous enough to field its own team that competed against other Kansas town teams.
Sometimes cities then would shut down.
Towns shut down to give everyone a chance to attend the game. Some town teams would resort to paying for an out-of-town ringer, often a real good pitcher or catcher, to tilt the competitive advantage their way. When gate receipts were collected, there might be a split with the winning team getting 60% to the losers 40%.
But in Kansas, town team baseball was terribly important in small towns. In fact, there were fights and there were other things going on that really meant there was a very fierce competitiveness among small towns.
Some of those rivalry games would be attended by more spectators than the combined population of the playing communities. As Kansas towns grew into larger cities, some fielded several ball teams, which eventually led to intra-city league play.
There were a tremendous number of teams playing in Wichita.
There were several reasons baseball flourished in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Radio and television hadn't been invented yet. If you wanted entertainment, you didn't typically find it at home. Back then, people looked for reasons to get out of the house.
Houses were a place you wanted to get out of. They didn't have air conditioning. They were small for the large families they had. So you didn't want to stick around a house.
So people got out of their hot houses and either played ball or went to the local ballpark and watched games. At times, the stakes of those town team games went well beyond the game's box score.
Some of those towns at the time were vying for who gets to be the county seat and things of that nature. They were trying to survive.
So, town baseball in Kansas was more than just a game. Winning was connected to surviving.
So it was a way for you to brag and try and recruit more people to come to your community and those sorts of things, try and grow and become the prominent town in an area.
As popular as baseball was becoming in Kansas, you would be wrong to say it was universally accepted. It had its detractors.
Most of the resistance tended to focus on what day of the week they were playing.
There were blue laws forbidding games being played on Sunday.
The Sunday baseball issue was nationwide. It wasn't just here, it was all across the country. It affected major league teams in some places as well as town teams.
But Sunday was often the only day of the week players could get a game in. That's because a 6-day work week was common back then.
Baseball supporters might build a diamond just outside the city limits, because what happened was there was a contention that it was against the state constitution. You weren't allowed to play on Sundays.
Players were even arrested for playing on Sunday. A lawsuit made it to the Kansas Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court said, no, they're talking about gaming. And what they're talking about with gaming when they wrote this was gambling. So if they're not gambling, then there's really no law against it on the state level. And so then it was left to the cities to decide.
And some cities still banned baseball and other sports on Sunday right on into the 1900s. Some ballparks continued to be constructed outside city limits, so a game could be enjoyed on the only day of the week most workers had off.
And so that's why they wanted to play on Sundays. More people were free because they didn't have to work.
Baseball wasn't necessarily the only game in Kansas towns, but in that era, it was the most popular. The phrase baseball as the national pastime goes as far back in print as 1856. At a point, the town teams began to organize into leagues for scheduling conveniences.
Because it simplified the process of knowing when your games were going to be. Instead of having to negotiate each game individually.
More teams organized and more playing fields were needed as cities grew.
And it was pervasive, and by that I mean there were diamonds all over town. People could get to a game pretty easily, or they could go to see the local minor league team.
So as the popularity of baseball spread across the plains of Kansas, the ball players needed diamonds to play on, and the spectators needed grandstands to sit in to view the games. Admission could also now be more easily charged with enclosed parks. This was necessary to cover traveling expenses for visiting teams and raise a prize purse for the teams. This is the Pioneer Park Field grandstand in Kinsley. It's the second oldest grandstand at a Kansas baseball park. The original wooden grandstands were erected in 1899, but burned in 1931, then rebuilt in 1934. The rebuilt stands have wooden seating with a stone support structure. Most of the state's original wooden ballpark structures have been rebuilt with longer-lasting materials. Originally, Kinsley South Park shared a space with a horse track in front of the stands. Here, a trotter horse race passes in front of the grandstands. The enclosure gave shade to the spectators on hot summer days. Towns across Kansas started building their own covered grandstands for baseball and other events. These grandstands were important to civic pride and simply for a place to meet.
They could play other sports in front of the grandstand. They could have horse races in front of the grandstand. They had political speeches in front of it was kind of an amphitheater where everybody could come for whatever and do something outside, whatever required a large seating area.
Eberly says the Joe Campbell Memorial Stadium in Rossville, northwest of Topeka, is said to be the oldest Kansas grandstand still in use. It was built and first used in 1924. The Rossville and Kinsley ballparks are two of several historic Kansas ballparks.
So they're scattered around the state, And so those old ballparks are really, I think, important in the sense that they can still be used for what their original purpose was. And it ties you to that long, long history that goes back to the 1850s in Kansas for the sport of baseball.
Wichita went through boomtown growth in the late 1800s. As the city grew, so did the number of ball teams increase. And that required more ball diamonds to play on. The Epic Center building at 301 North Main in Wichita is the tallest building in Kansas. But in the late 1800s, this block was an empty city block. Early Wichita ball players set up a playing diamond here. There are stories of cowpokes playing ball here as well as physicians and lawyers teaming up against each other in games here.
But the first ballpark in Wichita that was really built as a ballpark was in the 1000 block of South Main Street. And that was, at that time, the end of the streetcar line.
Those streetcars brought people south from downtown on Main Street. Our drone video picks up no evidence of that ballpark at Main and Gilbert now in what is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Wichita. Just consider how many attended the final game of the 1911 season deciding the champion of the South Central Kansas League. Mulvane and Clearwater were the two town teams. Their combined population then was 1,600, yet the game drew 2,000.
So it was a tremendous local interest.
And these town team competitions were a tremendous source of local pride to those Kansas towns.
It was very often boosterism. Again, these people really, that's how you get 2,000 people to come to a ball game where 1,600 people live.
Eberly says town teams peaked after the First World War and continued to be played right into the Second World War in the 1940s. Many of the towns couldn't muster a team because so many eligible players went off to war. And then after the war, town team baseball had to compete with Americans' discovery of other activities.
It became too easy to do too many other things. We have vehicles that take us anywhere we want to go, so we can go to a lake instead of sitting around town and watching a baseball game. So the competition for activities to do began to increase substantially.
Town ball in Kansas and other states hasn't completely faded away, but isn't as widespread as before World War II. Industrial or company ball teams were organizing and getting popular in the same era of the town teams.
So in the same way the towns used to compete against each other, sometimes companies would compete against each other.
Company teams go back to the 1860s in many of the nation's large cities. Company teams played games against their work competition or within their company. These teams were usually company-sponsored and bore company logos.
Whether it be a factory, whether it be the oil field or whatever it might be, you have all these employees. It was a way to entertain them. And so they would bring in some ringers, sometimes those companies would. You wonder how much those players actually had to work for the company and how much time they actually just spent getting ready for baseball and playing games.
In modern baseball, the goal of the minor league player is to get to the major leagues. After all, the minimum annual salary for a major league player in year 2021 is more than $570,000. But decades ago, some company players could actually turn down big league contracts and make more money playing at home. In 1915, an oil boom erupted in Butler County east of Wichita. Oil towns formed to service the burgeoning industry and to house the oil field workers. There were towns like Midian and Oil Hill in Butler County. William Allen Greene writes in his book, Midian, Kansas History of an Oil Boomtown, that Oil Hill and Midian fiercely competed in annual baseball series against each other. In 1919, Greene writes that the Midian team hired the great Casey Stengel, Roy Sanders, and Joe Crisp, all major league players. Those players could be described as ringers to help Midian win against Oil Hill. Well, it worked. Midian won 1-0. Stengel, he writes, had a contract dispute with the Brooklyn Dodgers then, so he hired himself out to industrial teams. Stengel played for 5 major league teams in his career and later managed the New York Yankees to 7 World Series championships. Stengel ended his career with the New York Mets. The story is indicative of what town and industrial teams would do to win and how professional players supplemented their big league salaries. Green's book indicates the Empire Company gave their ball players the highest labor classification, $9 a day, plus splitting the gate receipts at each game they played in. Some of those workers continued to work for the company after their playing days were over. Those players preferred that job security to the insecurity of being a professional ball player, especially at a time when players were traded like commodities and lacked pensions. In cities like Wichita, these company teams organized into industrial leagues. Airplane companies had teams, including the Boeing Bombers and the Cessna Bobcats. The sports pages of the local papers then, the Eagle and the Beacon, regularly posted all the league standings. There was an appetite for City League ball news. Those teams fielded quality players, and fans turned out to see them. The photos of the teams and their stars filled the sports pages. One of the biggest stars at the time was Glenn Hoag. To this day, Hoag's daughter, Glenda Spears, loves to brag about her father's baseball playing days. Spears saved about every newspaper story of her dad's career on the Wichita Watermen team back in the 1920s to 1940s era.
One of these newspapers called him the Babe Ruth of the Sandlots.
Glenn Hoag and the Wichita Water team won both city and state championships. If there's any doubt to how talented the Watermen team was, just look at the record of their 10 straight wins. It includes beating the highly vaulted Kansas City Monarchs 4-3 in 12 innings. Kansas baseball history includes semi-pro baseball. We generally associate professional baseball with the organized major and minor league teams.
Semi-pro was totally outside of so-called organized baseball.
Semi-pro teams were often part of industry leagues where the players worked at the company which sponsored the team and paid the players. Town teams would also include semi-pro players.
The Boeing Bombers were an outstanding example. Rapid Transit Dreamliners, who became a real factor in semi-pro baseball, were typical of that sort of team.
And there were times when some of the semi-pro players could make more money at their playing level than minor and major league players back then.
$600 or $700 a month, which was a very good salary at that time.
The Rapid Transit Company ran Wichita's buses. The company ball team was really good.
They had a lot of former major leaguers who played for them, including Bobby Boyd, who had come here after a long major league career.
Before Bobby Boyd settled down in Wichita, he played for several major league teams, including the Kansas City Athletics. Boyd was the first African American to sign with the Chicago White Sox. He drove buses while also playing for Wichita's Rapid Transit Company after his major league career. He died in Wichita in 2004. Boyd is a member of the Kansas and Wichita Sports Hall of Fames, as well as the National Baseball Congress Hall of Fame. Once old-time local baseball got organized into playing leagues, playoffs followed. Then in 1931, a Wichitan by the name of Raymond Hap Dumont is credited with founding the first statewide tournament. Now, we won't talk about those tournaments without also talking about where the games were played. Island Ballpark on Ackerman Island seated fans for tournament, minor league, and other exhibition games. The Island Park Stadium was built in 1912 on what was a large sandbar in the Arkansas River. It was north of the Douglas Street Bridge. The sandbar started to form in the 1870s and grew to several acres. Now just think, the general location of today's Exploration Place and its surroundings is about where Ackerman Island, with its ballpark and Wonderland amusement park, including a large roller coaster, used to be. Today's single-channel river setting looks a lot different than when baseball was played here.
The ballpark burned in 1933. Various reasons were given. I think they finally decided somebody carelessly discarded a cigarette.
The destruction of that stadium set other things in motion. The Depression-era Works Progress Administration, WPA, already wanted to fill in the West River Channel and return the river to one larger channel to help control flooding. So, with the Island Park gone, Dumont needed a new venue for his games. He turns to Wichita City leaders for help and makes a promise. He says if the city builds a new stadium ballpark, Dumont will organize a national tournament to play there. The Lawrence Ballpark also became a WPA project. It was the start of the National Baseball Congress, the NBC.
HAP was able to convince the city to build a new stadium, and they did that. And then, of course, in 1935 was the first year for the NBC World Series. HAP gets a hold of Satchel Paige, who's one of the most famous pitchers ever to play the game, and the rest is history, as they say.
Raymond Dumont, with the nickname HAP, short for Happy, was a sports columnist, and he also sold sports equipment and promoted baseball tournaments. Now, he knew if he could get Satchel Paige to play, fans would fill the new ballpark.
When you think of Kansas baseball, I think everybody's got to know about Satchel Paige and his great performance when he came down to the NBC tournament in 1935.
Some baseball historians say Leroy Satchel Paige is the greatest pitcher of all times. Paige wasn't from Kansas. He was born in Mobile, Alabama. Here's what the great Hall of Fame St. Louis Cardinals pitcher Dizzy Dean said about Paige's fastball.
Dizzy Dean saw him, and Dizzy Dean looked at Satchel Paige. He said, boy, he makes my fastball look like a changeup.
Paige is forever connected with the beginning of the National Baseball Congress tournament and Kansas baseball history. So, Dumont wanted Paige and the Bismarck, North Dakota Churchill's baseball club Paige pitched for in the tournament that first year in 1935. Dumont offered Paige $1,000 to play. Dumont didn't have the money, but expected the tournament's gate receipts to more than cover the expense. They did. $1,000 was a lot of money in those Depression-era years.
At the time, $1,000 would pay a doctor for 3 months or a lawyer for 4 months, and Paige gets paid that to come in for a 2-week tournament. And Satchel Paige, why was he playing in the NBC World Series? Why was he not playing in the Negro Leagues? Because he could make $1,000 in 2 weeks at events like the NBC because he was such a great player.
Paige, of course, did play in the Negro Leagues, including for the Kansas City Monarchs and later for the Cleveland Indians once integration came to the majors. But like Shad says, Paige did a lot of barnstorming games for pay on the side.
You figure he's paying him $1,000. Actually, he's getting off cheap because they packed that ballpark every time Satchel pitched.
Paige's pitching carried the Bismarck team to victory in Wichita's first NBC tournament.
So they go down there and, man, they clean up the NBC tournament.
After the NBC win, and before leaving the state, the team plays a game in McPherson.
So they stopped at McPherson, and that night, Satchel Paige, he called in his outfield and infield, and he struck out the side with nobody on the field.
That was one of the ways Paige entertained the fans with his dominating pitching. That kick-started Wichita's NBC tournament, which continues to thrive decades later.
The NBC history is, to me, the leading point of baseball history in Wichita. I mean, 86 years, there's no other organization that has been here that long playing the sport that we all love.
And while we're talking about tournaments and series, what many might not know is that the College Baseball World Series once had its series in Wichita. The year was 1949. That was a year before the World Series was played in Omaha, where it's been ever since. Now the question is, did Wichita miss an opportunity to be the regular host city, or was it a case of too many games for one Wichita stadium to schedule?
There was really no fault on Wichita's part. It was just that they, like I say, they'd been trying for years to get minor league baseball back here and got it, and then they had all that other baseball going on in the same ballpark, and the NCAA was just afraid it might not all balance out.
The NBC tournament has attracted thousands of players on teams from all corners of the U.S. and from beyond our nation's borders.
We've seen Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire and Tom Seaver and so many others of the greats of the game, so many Hall of Famers that have played in that tournament as college players. So it's a huge part of Wichita's baseball legacy.
The NBC players can range from those excelling on the sandlots to those destined to the big leagues and former major leaguers. Now, any real ball fan who looks at the lists of NBC Hall of Fame members will be amazed at the players coming through the Wichita tournament. Now, there were numerous stars like Ozzie Smith and Roger Clemens, all who starred in Wichita before reaching fame in the majors. Also on that Hall of Fame list for his pitching exploits in the NBC State Tournament is Isaiah Fireball Jackson, one of the more interesting Kansas baseball historic stories.
Isaiah just dominated.
Gerald McCoy makes it his life mission to tell the story of Isaiah Fireball Jackson. Jackson got the nickname Fireball because of his lightning-fast pitches. McCoy grew up in Wichita and says it was a family event to attend the NBC tournament games every summer at Lawrence Stadium.
It was a chance to see players that would someday be in the big leagues.
One night, the family took special notice of the Lansing prison team playing here.
They were very much the center of attention. Even while the game was going on over here, all the kids, especially the kids, they'd run down to the far end of the grandstand so that they could see them warm up.
Mike Kennedy, longtime voice of the WSU Shockers, also remembers those games when the prison team caused such a great commotion at just entering the ballpark.
Well, when they'd bring those guys in, every kid in the ballpark would run from wherever they were in the stadium to that end of the stands to see them bringing the guys in.
Seeing inmates in handcuffs and shackles was a must-see for the kids. But so was Jackson's pitching.
Anybody that was a kid in those days that would go to the NBC tournament will tell you about Lansing Penitentiary and Isaiah Fireball Jackson.
The stadium was packed the nights the Lansing prison team played. McCoy says the prison team as a whole really wasn't all that good. But Jackson was so good on the mound, he could carry the team on most nights.
He was center stage in the spotlight. He was the guy that brought everybody out to watch the ball game.
The story of Isaiah Fireball Jackson is one of the sad Kansas baseball stories. In 2018, McCoy authored the book Fireball, The Tragedy and Triumph of Isaiah Jackson. Jackson was born in Osawatomie, Kansas. 3-year-old Isaiah and his 4 siblings were abandoned when their parents divorced. Isaiah spent years in a Topeka orphanage, then later was sent to juvenile detention in Hutchinson.
But he had committed no crime, they just had no place else to put him.
Once Isaiah was out, he found his older brother Moses in Kansas City. Sadly, Moses introduced Isaiah to a life of crime, and both Jacksons were sent to Lansing Prison for armed robbery. There, he excelled at pitching for the prison team. Word of his pitching exploits reached the ears of Hap Dumont, founder of the NBC tournament. Dumont arranged for the Lansing team to play in Wichita. Dumont, the consummate promoter, knew fans would pack Lawrence Stadium to see a pitcher like Fireball play. Well, he was right.
He's probably one of the greatest unknown baseball legends in Kansas baseball history.
Fireball drew major league attention from the Baltimore Orioles and Philadelphia Phillies. The teams were hoping Jackson would get an early parole. Well, it didn't happen. Then the Pittsburgh Pirates took interest in Fireball, and when Jackson was finally paroled, the Pirates signed the pitcher to a minor league contract and sent him to their Reno, Nevada Class A team.
In hindsight, we can now see that that was probably the worst thing you could have done to Isaiah, was send him to Reno, Nevada.
Jackson still didn't know how to function outside institutions. No one ever taught him how to do even the simplest things in life, including how to drive a car, balance a checkbook, count money, or even use a telephone. Long story short, he got in trouble again and was back in prison.
He just was in no way, shape, or form prepared to be on his own.
In later years, while in prison, Fireball turned his attention to painting. He excelled at this art. That was while he was in the Missouri prison system.
He never pitched on the outside again. The Pirates never did put him on waivers. They held his contract rights for 10 years while he was in prison, just hoping that he could get another work release.
Jackson was a model prisoner and an inspiration to other inmates to rehabilitate themselves. Jackson died in 2004 at age 64 after a battle with cancer. The NBC tournament began to evolve in the latter 60s and the 70s. The town teams and semi-pro teams of decades past are replaced with teams filled with collegiate players who play in the NBC tournament hoping to get the attention of pro scouts. Collegiate players play on teams from Alaska to Florida, Maine to Hawaii, and on Kansas teams like the Liberal BJs, Hayes Larks, the Broncos of Wichita, Hutchinson and El Dorado, and many others.
So many of the greatest players in the game have come through Wichita to play in that tournament.
The athletes who play in the NBC here know this is a tournament Major League scouts attend. Players understand, if they play well, this could lead to professional status.
The players that have come through Wichita and then have gone on to Hall of Fame careers at the Major League level. I mean, we have over 800 players that have been a part of the NBC World Series and then gone on to play at Major League level. Not just professionally, but in the major leagues. It's hard to touch that, I think. It's a great responsibility to keep it going. And it's always going to look different than it did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
This program is brought to you by the following. Humanities Kansas. We believe that stories carry our culture and ideas change the world. Fidelity Bank.
Our next move will shape the future of Wichita. Let's lean into the challenges and believe in the promise that progress holds.
Also brought to you by locally owned Meineke of Wichita, Hutchinson, and Derby.
Whole arm's busted. Only option is to replace it.
Just scratch. Unnecessary repairs don't fly outside a repair shop. They shouldn't fly inside one. Meineke, doing car care right.
And by the Greater Wichita Area Sports Commission. The commission serves as the administrator of the NBC World Series. We are excited to be a sponsor of this PBS Kansas documentary and are extremely proud of the impact that the NBC World Series has had upon the history of Kansas baseball. Additional support was provided by the Wichita Wind Surge at this state-of-the-art Riverfront Stadium. More information at milb.com/Wichita.